Good morning, everyone. My name is Camille Sinclair, and I'll be your moderator for today. Welcome to the official launch of the Public Expenditure Review, PER, of the education sector in Jamaica, which is being executed by the Government of Jamaica through the Ministries of Finance and the Public Service and Education and Youth in collaboration with the World Bank and UNICEF Jamaica. This public expenditure review analyzed the adequacy, efficiency, and quality of public spending in education in Jamaica. These three aspects were analyzed using local data and comparisons to regional and international standards. At this time, I want to extend a warm welcome to the Minister of Finance and the Public Service, Dr. the Honorable Nigel Clark, MP, Minister of Education and Youth, the Honorable Favour Williams, MP, UNICEF Country Representative, Ms. Mariko Kagoshima, Country Director for World Bank, Ms. Lilia Burumchuk, and World Bank's Human Development Program Leader for the Caribbean, Mr. Timothy Johnston. Let me also welcome Emanuela De Gropello, Practice Manager for Education in Latin America and the Caribbean, and Ingrid Bjerk, Education Specialist of the World Bank, who are also critical in the development of the PER. I understand they're joining us virtually. And the media, other specially invited guests, or other guests join us virtually. We are streaming live on the Ministry of Finance's website, as well as Facebook, YouTube, along with GIS and PBCJ. So welcome to those of you who are joining us today. Our first speaker is Ms. Mariko Kagoshima, UNICEF Country Representative, who will deliver her remarks. Mariko Kagoshima has served UNICEF for over 20 years in various capacities, including UNICEF Deputy Representative in Honduras and Guatemala, where she was responsible for the overall management of UNICEF's programs. Prior to that, she worked in UNICEF Uganda, Angola, Afghanistan, and Mexico. Please make her welcome.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Dr. Honorable Minister Nigel Clark, Honorable Favour Williams, our colleague and friend, Lillian, of the Director of the World Bank, Timothy, thank you very much for being here. Good morning, everybody, medias and colleagues. Thank you so much for being here. Today, Public Expenditure Review meeting, dissemination. So today's public dissemination of the Public Expenditure Review on education is a significant moment that demonstrates the value of partners coming together to achieve tangible results, especially for children and their families. Against the backdrop of a massive learning crisis in education, exacerbated, of course, by COVID-19, UNICEF is extremely pleased to have worked with the World Bank and the Government of Jamaica on this very important review of education expenditure. The Public Expenditure Review is critical to decision-making that will impact the education of Jamaican children, an issue that we know is heavily consuming the minds of parents, teachers, school administrators, and students across the island. It is an issue that UNICEF cares deeply about. The expenditure review indicates that education spending in Jamaica is higher than the regional average, and it is in line with the international norms. However, we must all remain concerned about the current level of investment has not resulted in anticipated outcomes, such as higher student enrollment and completion rates, especially among boys and girls at the secondary school level. Before COVID-19, Jamaica's children had a learning gap of 4.5 years. The pandemic has exacerbated this situation. Estimates from the World Bank highlight that children will lose an additional 1.3 years, in addition to 4.5 years, in learning-adjusted years of schooling. This translates to a significant annual loss per student, which will have a significant negative impact on human capital and financial growth for Jamaica in the long run. The Public Expenditure Review provides additional insights and undeniable evidence that can inform policy changes and sustainable action, with the goal of optimizing the use of limited public resources to promote quality education and develop human capital. In times of economic uncertainty, Jamaica is constrained to significantly increase public spending for the education section. However, this review identifies relevant areas to achieve efficiency gains that can lead to greater education outcomes for the country. The review calls us all to an urgent action, reminding us that if we fail to act now, our children will bear the burden for years to come. As recommended, together we must examine a way to increase examine a way to increase the education budget from 2.4 to 3.9 billion Jamaican dollars annually for next 1 to 2 years to mitigate students' dropout and reverse learning loss of these last 2 years. The projected cost of failing to do this is an economic loss of 828 billion Jamaican dollars and will have a dire effect on the lives of many Jamaican children. Continue to act decisively and ensure that Jamaica's education system provides the highest standard of quality education for all children, demonstrating the intricate link between results and investment. Advance the full integration of result-based budgeting under the government medium-term framework across all MDAs. UNICEF has been pleased to partner with the government of Jamaica to support the optimization of public resources in the area of education and health in collaboration with PAHO and UNDP through the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals Fund. The fund has provided resources valued at $1.2 million US. As part of this joint program, in 2021, UNICEF and PAHO supported the training of close to 180 public officials in result-based budgeting and developed tools to promote greater efficiency, effectiveness, and equity in both ministries. We have also commenced work to conduct deep dives on some of the areas identified as critical by the Public Expenditure Review. We will also be supporting a parallel capacity building exercise with budget officers. In this vein, UNICEF has developed this budget calendar, which will be shared to all participants today. But this calendar goes up to March next year because it is in accordance with calendar year. UNICEF is committed to continuing to leverage global resources and technical assistance to support the Ministry of Education and Youth and the Ministry of Finance and Public Services towards ensuring timely actions are realized, especially for priorities linked to the SDGs and Jamaica's Vision 2030 that affect the well-being and future of our children. As UNICEF Jamaica embarks on our New Country program for the next 5 years, our commitment to supporting the government and the people of Jamaica will be deepened and expanded. We are encouraged by the government's continued receptiveness towards fostering additional technical collaboration, and we extend our gratitude to the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Education and Youth for championing and expanding this dialogue. We have much work to do together. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was Ms. Mariko Kagashima, UNICEF country representative, delivering her remarks. I will now ask Ms. Lilia Brunchuk, country director of World Bank, to deliver her remarks. Ms. Brunchuk is responsible for maintaining a solid partnership with countries to address their development challenges. She has strong and diversified World Bank experience in leading teams and complex operational and corporate assignments, such as regional and country strategies, World Bank's operation simplification and coding reform. She has extensive experience on leading policy dialogue with governments on various aspects of development. She led the preparation of the first World Bank regional strategy for Central Asia. Prior to joining the bank, Ms. Brunchuk was a deputy governor of the National Bank of Moldova, which is Moldova's central bank. In that capacity, she worked on the establishment of a regulatory framework for the foreign exchange market, reform of banking supervision, and bank restructuring. Please make her welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Honorable Minister Williams, Honorable Minister Clark, dear participants, it is great to be here today to launch the public expenditure review, which we worked together hand in hand with UNICEF. And I'm very proud of this partnership and the results of this work. Last 2 years have been really difficult for the entire world, and then they have been difficult for Jamaica, and they have been particularly difficult for the education sector and for our children, because this pandemic has affected school results and actually has affected the prospects of this coming generation. And I'm really glad that we're discussing this report today, and we're discussing the next steps because we would like to make sure that this next generation doesn't lose the potential that they have to live better lives in the future. And I think this public expenditure review, which started before the pandemic, but it was finalized during the pandemic and takes into account the difficulties encountered by the countries during the pandemic, is providing some very good recommendations on how to improve the education sector and how to make sure that the future generation of Jamaicans have possibility of prospering in their lives. I was very happy to see that the government has included some of the key recommendations from this report in its Reform of Education in Jamaica 2021 report. We always are very happy when the governments find the analytical work and analysis that we're producing useful and incorporate it in their own work. And I also would like to commend the government for its commitment to establish a monitoring and oversight committee to ensure the implementation of the recommendations of the report prepared by the Task Force on Education Reform. The World Bank's support will not end here. We already started working with the government on preparing a new project on education, and this project, I hope, will support building resilience and help prepare the Jamaican students for the 21st century. The work on the project is ongoing, and the design of the project and the focus, the concrete programs that will be financed by the project are still being developed during the preparation stage. But some initial areas that the project will focus on are to improve the access to quality education in priority areas such as skills, particularly science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics, so-called STEM. and also in aligning the needs for skills for the modern labor market. This will also be achieved through looking at the infrastructure, improving the infrastructure, and making sure that the conditions in the education sector are conducive to learning. I would like to congratulate all of us again, and I look forward to us cooperating in this very important area in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was Lilia Baruncho, Country Director of World Bank. Next, we will have a presentation by Mr. Timothy Johnston, Human Development Program Leader for the Caribbean, World Bank. Timothy Johnston joined the Latin America and Caribbean, or LAC, region in May 2018 and relocated to the Haiti country office in September 2019. He previously served as Human Development Program Leader for Southeast Europe, based in Vienna, Austria. He has wide experience in the World Bank, working on health and human development issues, including field assignments in Cambodia and Burkina Faso, and has worked in a wide range of countries in East Asia and Africa. Please, let's make him welcome.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome, and express appreciation to the ministers for hosting this event, to UNICEF for the excellent partnership, and for the members of the press for their presence and interest. One brief update on my biography is I, in fact, relocated to Kingston on February 1st. So I'm very pleased to be here and have the opportunity to follow up with the government partners and others on this important report and the recommendations. So I am presenting to you the work of the Public Expenditure Review. It was a partnership between the World Bank and UNICEF. I should note that although I played a key role in supporting the team and coordinating the report, the lead author was Ingrid Bjerke, who's connected online. So there was a strong technical team behind this report, but I had the pleasure of presenting the main findings to you now. First slide. So first, I'll provide some brief context. The first message is that human capital is very important. It's important for economic growth. It's important for creating more and better jobs and increasing incomes for families. And it's important for reducing poverty and inequality. But in that context, according to the World Bank's Human Capital Index, a Jamaican child will only be about 53% as productive as he or she would be if they had had complete education and full health care. And that's somewhat lower than the average for the Latin American Caribbean region and somewhat lower than other comparable upper middle income countries. And what that means is that even though a child on average finishes about 11.4 years of schooling by the time they reach their 18th birthday, if you factor in what they actually learn during those years, it's only equal to about 7.1 years. So that's where that learning gap is coming from. And in addition, because of the COVID pandemic and the school closures, that learning gap may have actually increased and may now be only about 5.8 years equivalent schooling. So it's an important challenge that is facing the government and the people of Jamaica. And of course, Jamaica is facing multiple challenges of recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic, restoring growth, reducing fiscal deficits, but also improving both the quality, efficiency, and equity of services. So let's go to the next slide. Because this is a press briefing, I'm going to start with the headlines. I will give you the main findings, and then I will present some of the evidence that led us to those conclusions. So the first finding is that overall, if you compare with other similar countries, the level of spending on education in Jamaica has been adequate. Although, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, there are going to be additional costs and burdens on the sector that will need to be addressed to help children catch up, particularly in the next 2 years or so. And second, even though the level of spending has been relatively high, this has not resulted in the same level of learning outcomes. And that suggests that there's room to improve the efficiency of spending. And then our next recommendations look at some of the areas that you could improve that efficiency. The first would be better allocation or reallocation of spending across levels of education, from preschool to tertiary. And broadly, we find that compared to other countries, Jamaica is spending less on preschool education and more on tertiary than similar countries. Next, if you compare the percentage spending on teacher salary to other countries, Jamaica is spending somewhat more of their total budget on teacher salaries than other countries. And so there may be some opportunities to improve some efficiency there. One, if you look in detail, you can see there's an unequal distribution of teachers among schools, both in terms of the number and their qualifications. Second, there can be improvements in the quality of teacher training. Third, there may be ways of improving the efficiency of the use of classroom time. And then finally, you, of course, have a big challenge with the migration of teachers outside of Jamaica. Next. In terms of the overall spending on capital, infrastructure, it's somewhat low compared to the needs, but there may be opportunities to improve the school network. And in general, if you look at how pro-poor spending is, the government spending on preschool and pre-primary education or primary education generally benefits the more poor families, whereas tertiary spending is more likely to favor better off families. And households are still spending a lot of their own money on education. There is a very important school feeding program in Jamaica, but it doesn't reach all of the vulnerable students, and there's still some students that are from the better off families that are benefiting from this program, so there may be a way of improving that. And there may be ways of also improving some of the other kind of fees and costs that parents pay at the secondary level. And then finally, there may be ways of making a more efficient allocation formula of financing schools to balance things out. Now I'm going to go to a little bit of the detail of where we came from these findings. So first, the first graph shows you, with Jamaica in the red, if you compare government spending on education as a percentage of GDP or gross domestic product compared to the overall economy, Jamaica right now is about the average compared to most countries, and in fact is somewhat higher than most of its comparable Caribbean countries. But if you then look at the efficiency, the outcomes of education, if you compare the learning adjusted years of schooling with the level of spending, you can see that Jamaica in the red dot on the right is somewhat below the average that you might expect. And that gives you about a 10% gap between what you'd expect of the learning levels based on the level of spending and the amount of learning that children are actually achieving in school. Next slide. Now, very important achievement for Jamaica is you have almost universal access to education up to the age of 16. It's almost 100% enrollment. But then you can see there's a gap and a fall off after age 16 with a sharp drop in enrollment. And that decline is much higher among boys than girls. And if you look at the next slide, it tells you the reasons for children not complete, no, sorry, to the right side, back to the previous slide. Thank you. So on the right side of the slide, you can see the first group gives the reasons for dropping out of the school, with the lack of interest in school being an important reason, but also other factors like family problems. And if you compare the reasons females or girls compared to boys drop out, the biggest reason for boys dropping out is lack of interest in school, and the main reason for girls dropping out is pregnancy. And of course, about twice as many girls drop out as boys. So you do have an important challenge to address there. Next slide, please. Now, if we then compare the quality of learning of Jamaica to other countries, the World Bank has developed a system for comparing the learning outcomes in a country with others, with a standard scale from about 200 to I think 600. And you can see Jamaica, compared to other countries in the region in the blue, is fairly low compared to other countries in this overall standardized learning outcomes relative to other countries in the region, and certainly other upper middle income countries. And as been already said, what this means is that even though you finish on average 11.4 years of school, it then adjusts to the equivalent of only about 7. And then, as I said earlier, this does result in a learning gap due to the COVID-19 pandemic that does need to be addressed. And this is an estimate, again, this would be the gap if there's no mitigation measures. So this is not for certain, but this is what could happen if there's no additional effort made to address that learning gap. Next, please. Another question we ask when we look at in a public expenditure review is the equity of spending. How does it benefit the poor equally or better than it benefits the better off families? And so if we look at equity, we can see that broadly speaking, that spending on the pre-primary levels and primary education is in general pro-poor, and you can see that's the lower side of the graphs, but they're above the curve on the right. But on tertiary education, it's relatively more of the better off people, the better off families that are benefiting from tertiary education. And you can also see on the left side that part of that reason is because the less well-off families, the poorer families, are less likely to attend tertiary education, therefore less likely to benefit. And so that's a lot of what's driving these results that you see. Next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. And then even though education is in principle free, the cost of attending school is still significant for many households. And you can see here that we use some poverty or household survey data to look at the allocation of expenditure. And you can see at the different levels, the graph on the left shows the estimated share of household expenditure at different levels compared to the level of government expenditures. So at the pre-primary level, partly because it's largely private in this country, households are spending more on pre-primary education than the government. Whereas at the higher levels, it's still more spending by government, but the households are still spending. And then I mentioned earlier this issue of the distribution of school feeding programs. We know school feeding programs are very important for helping kids stay in school and giving them good nutrition. But you can see if you compare the percentage of the poorest households, the poorest fifth of households compared to the next fifth in the middle, more of the poorest households benefit from school feeding, but there are still children in the better off families that are benefiting from school feeding programs. So you could improve the targeting of this program, still have the same impact, and not spend more money. Next slide. So here we'll provide a few more detailed recommendations. So the first area of recommendation is recovery from COVID, including addressing the learning losses from COVID. So on the first recommendation, to reduce the risk of student dropout and to reverse learning losses, which has potential cost of between 2.4 and 3.9 billion Jamaican dollars annually for the next 1 or 2 years. So there is immediate cost there, but our team estimated that the cost of not doing anything in terms of the lost revenue from these children or these as they become workers later would be almost 8.28 billion Jamaican dollars. So relative to the cost of not doing anything, it would be a good investment. And so there are some very specific measures that can be taken. That includes supporting the health and safety requirements for safe reopening of schools, campaigns to encourage re-enrollment and outreach to get kids back in school, targeted financial support for children most at risk of dropping out, and other programs to reduce dropout and also to support teachers to mitigate those learning losses. And so they can tailor what they do in the classroom to what each student actually needs. Next. Next, there's an opportunity to improve the tertiary education spending and the quality of early education spending, and these two would balance out. So I think the next real step is to explore in more depth what is driving this somewhat higher expenditure on tertiary education, and what would be some targeted measures where you could maintain the quality, maintain the equity so that low-income families, students still have a chance to go to college, but also improve the efficiency of the spending and reduce the cost. And then there may be opportunities to reallocate some of these spendings to support early child education, which we know is critical for improving education outcomes. Then, of course, some measures to tackle school absenteeism and reduce dropout. Some of these are detailed there. And then we say, when you look at the details on school network, because particularly some of the rural schools have a lot more teachers per student than some of the urban schools, there may be opportunities to what we say optimize the student network. So you have a good balance between the teachers and students, both in the urban and the rural areas. This can take some time, and it takes some study, but many countries have done this successfully. And with that, that covers our main recommendations, and I thank you for your time and interest.
A very insightful presentation, Mr. Johnston. Thank you so much. We now get into our remarks from the Government of Jamaica, starting with the Ministry of Education and Youth, by the Honorable Favour Williams MP, Minister of Education and Youth. Minister Williams is the Member of Parliament for St. Andrew Easton. She has extensive experience in the private sector, both locally and internationally, in areas such as market risk management, investment research, information systems, and more. Minister Williams is a chartered financial analyst by profession. She has an MBA with concentration in finance from the Wharton Business School at the University of Pennsylvania and a BA in economics from Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Favour Williams.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Madam Moderator. Let me acknowledge the Honorable Dr. Nigel Clark, Minister of Finance and the Public Service, and Honorable Marcia Smith, State Minister, as well here at the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service. Ms. Mariko Kagoshima from UNICEF, always with us. Thank you for your assistance in the education sector. And the team that's with you this morning, let me also acknowledge Ms. Lilia Barunchuk, Country Director, World Bank, who's working with us at the Ministry of Education and Youth, in particular looking at infrastructure and how we can improve on what we have. Let me acknowledge as well Mr. Timothy Johnston, Human Development Program Leader for the Caribbean World Bank, and your team, members of my team from the Ministry of Education and Youth. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. The Ministry of Education and Youth welcomes this public expenditure review and analysis from the World Bank and UNICEF on Jamaica's public education spending. It adds to others, including the recently published Jamaica Education Transformation Commission's report that we've been analyzing to help determine the Ministry of Education and Youth's policy directions in the short, medium, and long term. It is imperative that policies and initiatives are guided by empirical data, and the overview and recommendations provide much needed material for internal discussion within the Ministry of Education and Youth and the government, and with the wider public about possible shifts in policy priorities, areas of focus, and allocation of funding. The analysis reinforces the fact that Jamaica's expenditure on education is relatively high and adequate when compared to that of other Caribbean states and in line with international standards at an average of about 5% of GDP. There remain concerns, however, about resource allocation across the sector, the built-in inefficiencies, and the underutilized capacity in some areas. Jamaica has long recognized that the development of human capital is critical to our economic development, and that a strong educational foundation is imperative to achieve our goals. Yet, there are historical and social dynamics that continue to have an impact on reform and transformation of the education sector to achieve the greater efficiencies and improved outcomes that we desire. We recognize and appreciate that quality assurance at the primary and secondary levels must also be revisited with the aim of improving the quality of pre-service teacher training with greater focus on practical experience, improvement in the in-service teacher training program to enhance teaching effectiveness, and including specialized training for school leaders. The good news is that some of these measures are already underway, and our implementation of the specialist teacher program at the primary level is one step aimed at addressing weakness in numeracy and literacy performance. The long-standing challenges to the education sector have been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, and so we have to put additional resources into addressing learning loss experienced by our students over the past 2 years, while at the same time dealing with the much-needed infrastructure development across all our schools. Efforts to mitigate and prevent student dropout require a wide societal understanding of what this means to the students' personal development and future social prospects. In other words, does a family understand the long-term implication of having a child helping out with income earning now, as against the benefits of investing the time in their education? And I speak to our initiative to open up grades 12 and 13 as an additional 2 years of high school for our students. Many would rather try to find a work now, even though they have no certification or have not attained the required mathematics and English at the Caribbean Secondary Education Certificate CSEC exam level. We have been doing all we can to encourage our parents to continue to invest in their children's education, because their job prospects would be brighter if they leave school having skills and having attained certification. Additionally, we have efforts underway. We've called it the Yard to Yard Find the Child, and it's literally, physically going yard to yard to ensure that all our children are back again into the face-to-face environment in our schools. We know that during the pandemic, there were a number of students who were not engaged on any of the platforms that we had. And so our efforts now are to get them back into the face-to-face environment. And we have begun to have success with this as we look at the numbers on a week-to-week basis in terms of the attendance. So that is something that we will continue until we are back up to full attendance in our schools. So the Ministry of Education is clear, the government's objectives are clear, that we must invest in education to serve as the engine of human capital to drive economic growth. Collectively, our success is dependent on an acceptance and belief in the centrality of education for students and the nation, a focus on building teacher and leadership capacity to deliver reforms at the school level, and a culture of continuous improvement that benchmarks educational practices against the best in the world. I recognize that we do have a lot of ground to cover, and this report will help us to contextualize the decisions that we have to make. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Favor Williams, reminding us that we must invest in education, and I'm sure the parents and the students, the kids, they're very happy to be back in school, seeing all their friends, and, you know, the parents getting a little break from having them at home. Next, we'll have Dr. the Honorable Nigel Clark, MP, Minister of Finance and the Public Service. Minister Clark is Member of Parliament for St. Andrew Northwestern. He has served as Ambassador of Economic Affairs when he represented Jamaica's interests with multilateral institutions, and as a Senator in the upper house of the Jamaican Parliament. Minister Clark's public sector career also includes service over various periods as Chairman of the National Housing Trust, Chairman of the Port Authority of Jamaica, Chairman of the Heart Trust and Director of the Bank of Jamaica. Minister Clark has also been an active social entrepreneur, where he is the founding chairman of the National Youth Orchestra of Jamaica, an NGO that operates music for social change programs at 8 centers in Kingston and Spanish Town. Welcome, Dr. the Honorable Nigel Clark, DPhil, MP.
And you really, I hope I don't need an introduction in my own ministry. But Minister of Education, who is a former minister in the Ministry of Finance, Minister of State in the Ministry of Finance, country director for the Caribbean at the World Bank, country representative for UNICEF, Human Development Program lead for the Caribbean, members of the Ministries of Finance and the Ministry of Education, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I got it all, right? Yeah. Got it all. Yeah. I'm very, very pleased to be a part of this public engagement where we are launching the Public Expenditure Review that's conducted jointly by the World Bank and UNICEF. We believe in analysis to inform policy. We start from a premise that there's a lot of power for transformation in the policy choices that we make as a country. We have shown through the greatest of storms that by making good policy choices, we can weather storms and recover faster than our peers in the region and otherwise. We have to take that experience and bring it to other areas. That by making informed policy choices, we can transform our circumstances. It was in that spirit that I reached out to the World Bank with the consent of the Minister of Education a few years ago, prior to the pandemic, to help us analyze the data from a financial point of view. The Ministry of Finance makes the largest allocation in the budget to the Ministry of Education, nearly $120 billion each year, which you have seen 5.2% of GDP and 19% of the non-debt budget. And what we wanted to find out is, wait, look, we understand that on a comparative basis, the quantity of the expenditure is adequate, as the review has confirmed. But what about the quality of the expenditure? What about getting the most out of every dollar that we're spending? And the World Bank and the UNICEF were able to look at the entire range of data, make comparisons with other countries, and perform the kind of analysis that we, doing in country is probably more difficult to do. And the report, this is just the summaries that have been discussed here, but the report I encourage everyone to read because it makes some insightful findings. Now, we believe in not only the role of data to inform policy, but we believe in the transparency of data and of information. Many people might think, why is it that you would want to have this data that is not all flattering? Why do you want to have it in the public domain? Aren't people going to use it against you? Well, we depend on the rationality of the citizens of Jamaica. Everyone knows that the problems that we face here today are not the problems made in the last couple of years. They're problems that have accumulated over a long period of time. Yeah. And we have to have the courage to confront these problems. Now, the only way in which we'll have the courage to confront the problems is if we have the information. And in a democracy, it's not sufficient for the leaders to have information. What you need is for the people to have information so that they can support the policy choices that have to be made, which oftentimes on the surface can seem counterproductive or can seem to be against certain stakeholder groups or so forth. So we hope that by being completely transparent about the data, completely open about the information that has come out of this review, that it can catalyze the support in the society for the reforms that are necessary. Our school system was, to a large degree, built out many, many years ago, many decades ago, where our schools are located and the population that they serve and the numbers of children in each school is not all uniform, and there is room for much greater degrees of efficiency if we can muscle the ambition for reform. And so the purpose of making this information available, and we depend on our media partners here, not only to cover the press conference and to cover the sound bites from the press conference, but to dig deep into the expenditure review and bring to the public the data, the information, and the analysis that can allow for public opinion to be galvanized and for support to be accumulated so that the policy choices that are necessary to ensure that we move forward in the way that we have the potential to, that we capitalize on this. So I've said my piece. It's up to you now, right? Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much, Minister Clark. I think for the last 2 years, we've been exposed to two words in particular, resilience and recovery. You have always spoken about those two things, but you mentioned transparency just now, and transparency is a part of the Ministry of Finance's core values, and transparency leads to integrity. So it doesn't matter what the information is, we're letting persons know about it, because that's how it all starts for the change to take place. All right? So thank you so much. Now we are into our questions and answers segment. And we have persons who are joining us virtually via Zoom who may have questions. We ask that you use the raise hand feature and wait to be acknowledged or identified, and then you'll get a chance to ask your questions. We also have members of the media who are joining us via that platform, and persons who are here physically with us from CVM and Gleaner, I understand. So I'm going to allow our first question to come from former representative of the National Secondary Students Council, Miss Anna Robinson. Miss Robinson, you have a question?
Yes, I do. All right, firstly, I'd just like to thank the World Bank, UNICEF, and the government of Jamaica for the information which they shared earlier, such an exceptional expenditure review. As a former representative of the National Secondary Students Council, I have experienced the very building blocks of the learning crisis that we have at hand. And I also have had the opportunity to represent students on a national scope. I've gained a reasonable understanding of the magnitude of this situation, and I'm exceedingly concerned with the level of inequity that affects access to education, to quality education for our students. This is particularly for students who are currently unaccounted for, as well as students who have experienced significant learning loss. More so now that schools have been reopened. We have seen where during the 1.3 years when students were learning largely online, 120,000 of our primary and secondary students were disengaged from the education system. We have seen where school-age children are reported to be heading to the boatyard rather than to school. During my time as a national student representative, which was quite recent, I came to understand how some students would have fallen behind, but the learning processes around them still continued. With no interventions occurring for them, this not only affected their academic performance, but also their mental well-being. These are students who were present online and had hiccups along the way due to several realities. I was one of those students who suffered online. Many assignments never made it in, many classes were missed. My overall performance plummeted as I played catch up. Fortunately, I received private outside assistance to bring me up to speed, which is really the opposite to the reality of many of our students. With that being said, can we stop to imagine those who would not have been able to attend any classes and have been unaccounted for altogether? and it may only be a matter of time until it is confirmed that their reintegration into formal schooling is no longer a possibility unless we act urgently. My question is to the Minister of Education and Youth. My question is one that concerns many students across the island. Minister, what are the intervention and reintegration methods being carried out by your ministry to urgently combat the learning crisis our nation's children are now experiencing? I would have heard mention of the yard-to-yard initiative. I would love for you to expound on that and to also include other initiatives that have to do with both the intervention of students who would have been falling behind, who would have lost that 1.3 years of learning, and the reintegration methods being carried out. I believe that this issue requires a forward-thinking and inclusive solution, as the fate of our nation depends on it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that question. Let me deal with the issue you raised about the 120,000 students that were estimated that did not participate in school during the pandemic. Through efforts at the school level primarily, we are now down to about 90,000 students, and of that, the schools are in touch with 50,000 in terms of their whereabouts. And in terms of the other 40,000, we are beginning to see more of them back in school. So we have been working on the students who have not been engaged using a number of different initiatives to get them back in school. And you're asking about some of the initiatives that we are employing currently across our school network. And, I asked my team to itemize all the things that we're doing. And we have a number of initiatives, and I'll just run through them quickly. Number one, we are helping to retool and empower our teachers. So we are giving them more sessions in terms of psychosocial sessions in order to be able to help to re-socialize the students when they come back into the face-to-face environment. We're integrating more ICT into the classroom. We're organizing for learning. We're using the individual learning plan approach so that each student will be able to get some attention from the teacher in terms of their learning progression. To the best of our abilities, we're providing learning resources for teachers and students to include for our teachers lesson plans, teaching aids, televised or recorded lessons to help them in class. We are currently as well in the process of ensuring that all our teachers in the primary school are equipped with a laptop so that it can enable them in the classroom in terms of the teaching and learning experience. We are providing diagnostic tools to help teachers identify learning needs for the students so that we know that as the students come back, they're at different points on the learning scale. And so we're giving teachers these tools so that they can help to identify exactly where the children are and to be able to tailor the intervention for those children. You might recall that last summer we increased the learning opportunities by fully funding summer schools and extra lessons for students, and we will continue to do that throughout the school year and into the summer. We have a 24-hour learning channel for children for those who are more self-directed to get access to that. We've increased monitoring in our schools, and you do know that in the education sector we have education officers, and we've increased the use of our education officers. Additionally, we are engaging our parents more using our National Parent Support Commission, and we have a target of reaching about 70,000 parents in order to get them into programs as well that will help them to help their children while they're at home. And of course, I mentioned the Yard to Yard Find the Child initiative, which is aimed at locating, going into homes, understanding what are the reasons students are not engaging in education, and to look across government to work with our sister ministries to bring interventions to those homes as well. But we need to find out the information in order to take the right steps. And by that I mean, when we go into homes and we ask the questions, we may find out that a child isn't attending school because of, needs for lunch money, bus fare, uniforms, whatever it is. If we have the information, we are better able to target our intervention. So all of those are happening now. We do collect information on a weekly basis, so we're able to monitor the attendance across our schools. And again, I know that there is a significant effort going on at the school level to reach out and re-engage our students, and then once they get them into the classrooms, to begin the re-socialization of those students to the face-to-face environment.
Thank you so much, Minister Williams. Rihanna, thank you so much for your question. We have a question from here, from one of the members of the media. We just ask that you introduce yourself, where you're from, and then you pose your question. Thank you.
I'm Janelle Powell from CVM TV. And let me just preface my question by expressing my appreciation for being so transparent as to what's going on within our sector. However, what I've heard from the government is that they acknowledge the recommendations coming from these various parties, but I want to know which of these will be taken up in the short term, particularly concerning early childhood education.
Sure. So with regards to early childhood, what we recognize is that government needs to have a bigger presence in the early childhood sector. Currently, there are well over 3,000 early childhood institutions. And if you look at how many of those are funded by government, run by government, it's probably about 10%. So the government has recognized that there needs to be transformation in the early childhood sector, meaning have more schools that are funded, run by government with experienced practitioners who understand the learning process of children who are in the 0 to 6 years range. And so there are 2 initiatives underway. One is to transform, modernize, get more schools within the government's portfolio, more schools funded and run by government, to ensure that the existing practitioners in early childhood become trained so that they can, perform at a higher level. Currently, the government does provide some subsidy across the sector for basic schools. I think, it supports teachers in basic schools, even though basic schools are private institutions, but the government has taken that step over the years. And then additionally, we will ensure going forward that the age for assessment is done in all our early childhood institutions. And the importance of that is, on a child reaching 4 years old, you have this diagnostic testing or assessment that's done of the child. We did that in 2019. The pandemic years, it didn't happen during the pandemic years because you had to be in school to get it done. So that's something we're going to focus on to ensure that we get it done annually, because what that will tell us is exactly where on the learning scale that 4-year-old is. And so we can use the next years, age 5 to age 6 year to make the intervention. If you look at the data for 2019, what it showed us was that almost a third of our students at age 4 had issues with numeracy and literacy, and they had behavioral issues. So knowing that information early will direct us in terms of the intervention that we need to make so that when that 6-year-old shows up at primary school, they are ready for learning at primary school. So that's where our focus is in the early childhood sector.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much for your question. I understand we have another one from the Gleaner.
Good morning. My name is Jordana Murphy. In its recent report from the Jamaica Education Transformation Commission, they said Jamaica could benefit from taking lead for the Hart NSTA Trust to more formative levels of the education system. Will the ministry be undertaking this recommendation, and what is the timeline?
Okay, so you might have heard the Prime Minister talk about the report when it was launched, and in particular, he did indicate that the Commission would be doing follow-on work, doing exactly that, looking at the Hart Trust NSTA and its spending, the allocation, and what it has been doing over the last many years. So we await that study that the Prime Minister would like coming out of this, and then that would point in terms of the direction we should go.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I don't think we have any more questions. I think you guys have covered all the bases. All right, so once again, thank you for joining us today for the official launch of the Public Expenditure Review, PER, of the education sector in Jamaica. This initiative was executed by the Government of Jamaica through the Ministries of Finance and the Public Service and Education and Youth in collaboration with the World Bank and UNICEF Jamaica. Today we heard from the Minister of Finance and the Public Service, Dr. the Honorable Nigel Clark, Minister of Education and Youth, the Honorable Favour Williams, MP, UNICEF Country Representative, Ms. Mariko Kagoshima, Country Director for World Bank, Ms. Lilia Burunchuk, World Bank's Human Development Program Leader for the Caribbean, Mr. Timothy Johnston. And we'd like to thank our State Minister in the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service, the Honorable Marcia Smith, for joining us for this significant event. As a reminder, this public expenditure review analyzed the adequacy, efficiency, and quality of public spending on education in Jamaica. Thank you for joining us. It was a pleasure being your moderator. I'm Camille Sinclair, wishing you a productive rest of the day.